Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, April 11th, 2025, and our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Okay, look, I'm not doing this show anymore unless I impose a 125% tariff on you, okay? Gotta pay up, buddy. Sorry. Okay. I'll behave.
Then let's talk about tariffs, Larry. Here is what the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent, said about the tariffs in China.
Driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along. And that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well.
And Larry, here is
In this
what
scenario, to use your metaphor, the US.
here is what the Chinese expert Victor Gao, if I'm not mistaken,
Victor Gao,
he said about
Gao.
the response of China.
US has the bigger gun, and so China ends up having more to lose from this trade war, doesn't it? It can't sustain the loss of 15% of its export market, i.e. what you export to the US.
Not at all. China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. Right. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
The key is, Larry, that China was prepared for this.
Yeah.
And it didn't get China by surprise.
Yeah, no, they've I think the Chinese are much better at anticipating and thinking things through over a time horizon. And in the United States is not. There's no Trump, Scott, I can't believe how stupid Trump and Scott Bessent are. I really can't. I mean, this is, I thought they had a little bit better critical thinking skills, but obviously they don't. And I'm not here to say that, China's perfect and, look, China's done there's a long list of grievances I can bring up about China just out of my own personal experience as an investigator. There was we were involved with a case where a Chinese aluminum manufacturer was dumping aluminum into Mexico. They literally formed a partnership with the Knights Templar, a drug cartel, set up a big, let's call it a big yard where all this aluminum was brought in from China. It was restamped as made in Mexico and shipped into the United States. They're very creative. But so, I don't pretend that China is some innocent child in this whole affair. However, the U.S. conduct and treatment of China is so counterproductive and so insulting that Trump has started a trade war that he can't finish. The Chinese view is this. In the 1950s, when they were so underdeveloped, they were so poor, they were not the world's leader in manufacturing in the 1950s. They fought the U.S. to a standstill at the war in Korea, okay? They didn't have a Navy. They didn't have an Air Force. They just had a ground force. They fought us to a standstill. We couldn't win that when we had every other military advantage, including nuclear weapons. The world's different today. China is in It's a leading manufacturer in the world. And yes, they've got internal problems. They've got economic problems. The difference is China's got a political system where, if their people are unhappy, well, it's too damn bad. They've got a way to sort of impose their will on it. Not in the United States. The United States, while has been guilty of abuses here, doesn't have the same sort of potential control over the population that the Chinese do. What Trump has done is made it left no doubt whatsoever in the minds of the Chinese and the Russians, and I will suggest the Indians and the South Africans and the Brazilians and the Iranians and the Vietnamese and the Indonesians, and let's go down the list, that BRICS is we got to have BRICS. Got to have a viable alternative, because the United States is no longer worthy of trust. I think that's really what's going on here. This is cataclysmic. I can't believe, and it's not just economic though. I wrote about this last night. I think this is part of a broader power play by Trump with Europe to try to isolate and weaken China. Because look, it was in the last couple of days, or over the weekend, or over the course of this week, we were told, what's in Ukraine? By God, they're Chinese. They've been captured. They're fighting with the Russians. And then on, let's see, today's April 11th, so 3 days ago, on April 8th, you had Tammy Bruce. And maybe you've got this teed up, but she's at State Department going, yeah, China's providing 80% of this dual-use goods to Russia and helping them carry out this war. And lo and behold, the next day, Kaya Kallas, that airhead, stands up and says basically the same thing. So when you start getting a coordinated, I mean, when the United States and the European Union are all reading from the same script, and this is now, we've gone away from worrying about North Korean troops. Oh no, Chinese troops. Excuse me. We're into something dangerous. Excuse me.
Larry, do you see Donald Trump backing down? To what end? Is there any sort of limit to what they're doing right now? Because China said if they want to increase the tariffs, they're not going to care more, because that doesn't make sense for the China's market. In their market, if you go beyond 100%, 120%, that doesn't make sense for our market. We cannot import anything from the United States, and they cannot afford to buy the American goods. How do you see any sort of limit to what they're doing in the Trump administration?
Well, reality is gonna kick him in the ass. That's where this is headed. I'm not aware of a single good product that the United States produces that China absolutely needs. That if they don't get it, boy, they're the key critical part of their industry would be jeopardized, or the health and well-being of their people would be at risk. That's not the case, though, with the United States. There are rare earth minerals that only China produces, or China is the majority producer, that the United States absolutely needs in order to produce its weapons. Its defense industry is not just weapons, but communication devices, etc., that are essential for the United States, and we don't have an alternative. The same for pharmaceuticals. There are prescription medicines that millions of senior citizens in the United States, IR1. Fortunately, I'm not taking those medicines, but that are produced only in China. And it's not like somebody can run out and set up a quick factory and start producing it. So this is going to have some serious effects on the U.S. economy. And one of the big exports out of the United States to China has been soybeans. Guess this is not a trick question. Can you tell me which country, Nima, produces soybeans and has a trade relationship with China where they trade in their own currencies? We're going to see how smart you are. What country am I talking
The
about, Nima?
country that who's fighting the United States in Ukraine.
No, but what country? No. God, you're wrong. Brazil.
Yeah, Brazil. Yeah,
Man, I teed it up for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're living right there in Brazil. Okay. Gave you a slam
I got
dunk.
it.
No. Yeah, so think
Yeah,
about that. So
yeah, Brazil. Yeah.
all of a sudden, you're going to have a bunch of Brazilian farmers, man. It's going to be carnival. Whoa, boy,
Yeah. They're gonna be angry.
Yeah, hey, we're selling more to China. Woohoo! So
Yeah.
that, China is now realizing, you know, they've been willing to engage in a relationship with the United States. And, I actually had a friend, I lived, shared a home with a baker in Argentina, 40 years ago when I lived there. His bakery was being built, had to live with us, but he taught me a real lesson about relationships. And he described it. He said, if you take a glass, that's made out of actual glass and drop it and it breaks, maybe you can glue it back together, but it's never the same. And it's because you've got all the cracks and the different pieces there. That's where this relationship between the United States and China, that's what's happened now. We've broken the glass, and I don't think that Trump and Bessent can glue it back together. So this is this will mark this as the moment that the Trump administration, Trump's presidency, crashed and burned. I don't think he'll recover from this, frankly.
Larry, you mentioned Brazil. Do you think that we know that Brazil somehow tried to be in the middle with the problem in Ukraine? They tried
Yeah,
to not pick a side, but how about right now and the war with China? Do you think that would convince Brazil? You mentioned India, but Brazil is the American hemisphere. Brazil is closer to the United States. Brazil is something different for the United States. Do you think that they're gonna focus on the Latin America in terms of what's going on between the United States and China, or it's going to be the same policy as we've been witnessing with the Biden administration? Because right now it seems that as time goes by, the United States and China are getting prepared to fight even a bigger economic war.
yeah.
If that would be the case, how do you see the position of Brazil?
Oh, well, I think every country will always act in its own interest. And I haven't sat down and done an analysis of Brazil's exports. I don't know how critical, how important the U.S. market is for Brazil or vice versa. But I would anticipate that uh, this is, I don't see the United States turning around and trying to romance Brazil. You know, if Trump was going to get into this kind of battle with China, you'd think that he'd want to go out and line up all of his friends. But good God, he's imposing tariffs on everybody, including Brazil. So what kind and has suggested that countries like Brazil, man, couldn't wait to kiss his ass. His words, not mine.
Yeah.
I really sometimes I am vulgar, but and crude, but not like that, man. That was Trump. I don't care who you are in Brazil, but being told basically that you're a bunch of ass kissing American suck ups doesn't seem to me to be a good recipe for building friendship and warm relations. It's insulting, and that's what is that. This, and I don't know. You don't appreciate this because you're not sitting here in the United States, but the attitude of people who should know better, who are I'm talking people who are actively involved in trading on Wall Street. They're going, yeah, man, Trump, yeah, you tell him. We're going to delist China from the stock market. That's a good move. I mean, it is, it's reminiscent of sort of the attitude that um, the Northerners had during the start of the Civil War. That, all right, man, we're going to now go out and show those Confederates what's what. They went charging out to watch the first battle at Bull Run, and they got their ass kicked. What happened? That's why I don't think nobody's sitting down and calculating this through. So I think I don't see Brazil. I thought Brazil. I had concerns 6 months ago that Brazil would be a target, and I think they still are a target of U.S. subversion. That the Central Intelligence Agency would put in place activities to try to peel Brazil off from BRICS. And I do believe that one of the things Trump is working on, not talking about it publicly, but is to try to destroy BRICS. But I think that this whole incident may actually solidify Brazil's support for BRICS, not weaken it.
As we talk, Witkoff is in Russia and talking with Putin, and he's gonna talk with Putin. Peskov just informed us. He said that they're gonna meet. They're gonna talk about the situation in Ukraine, but I do believe they're gonna talk about the talks between the United States and Iran.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Because it's tomorrow, and they're gonna talk. How do you see the move on the part of the United States? What do they want from Russia, in your opinion?
Well, I think Witkoff has gone perhaps to deliver a message from Trump about how Trump wants to see things turn out. But Witkoff's going to end up having to sit and listen to Putin. I don't think Putin's going to pull any punches with him. I think, in fact, Putin may be inclined to say, "What the hell are you guys doing? You're trying to blow up the damn world? This has got to stop." I would not be surprised that Putin would make it very clear to Witkoff that Russia has now a special relationship with Iran. We've signed a treaty with them. It's been ratified by our legislature, by the Duma, and it's in place. And part of that is we've got the assurance of Iran that they don't have a nuclear weapon, they're not working on one, they're not going to build one. That's the terms of our agreement. You, on the other hand, are threatening them with war. And if I was Putin, I'd also go and point out, look, you're also committing an act of war against us. You are actively providing intelligence, weapons, planning, and are allowing attacks to take place in our country, that under no other circumstances this would be an act of war and our two countries would be at war. So for starters, you need to stop that. But if you think you're going to go into Iran and start a war, we've got their back and China's with us. Just understand what you're up against, Mr. Witkoff. That's my fantasy of how the conversation would go. Now, as Putin, Putin will probably be a lot more understated and calm. But really, when you step back and look at the issues, Putin, Putin needs to, if you will, knock some sense into Witkoff. Because if Witkoff thinks they're going to go and dictate to Iran the outcome, I'm sure you've seen, and maybe you've got the video of Bibi Netanyahu speaking in Hebrew, describing his talks with Trump. Yeah, here's what we really agreed on. We're going to turn Iran into Libya. And the lesson out of Libya was, Muammar Gaddafi was dumb enough to trust the West. Okay, you'll let me be your friend. You'll stop trying to subvert me. Okay, I'm getting rid of all my weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, and demilitarizing. Okay, I'm now ready. And we came in and raped him. I mean, we raped Libya, and Gaddafi wound up with a sword or something being shoved up his ass and being murdered. Not that Gaddafi was some great human being, but good God, the promises the West made, we betrayed them. I don't think the Iranians are that stupid. They're not going to. No, the Libyan option. No, we're not taking that. Forget about that. So, I watched your conversation with Pepe, and I think Pepe laid it out exactly right. That this is the United States they're going through the motions right now with respect to Iran so that they can attack Iran. However, I think the disruption with China now has maybe thrown a wrench into that machine. And so the expectations about how things would go are Trump's going to have to step back and think this through again because he's now got a bigger problem. And then you say, how can nuclear war, threat of nuclear war on Iran be a bigger problem? Well, China's not playing around. And the comments that you have seen come out in the last 24 hours, they aren't, they're not posturing. So, I think we can't look at this stuff as separate and independent. Here's the Iran room, and here's the China room, and here's the Ukraine room. No, they're all intermeshed. And I think at least the Russians and Chinese understand that. I'm not sure Trump does. Trump may think he can, isolate these things and treat them independently, but that's not how the world works.
Larry, with the case of Iran, how did you find the meeting between Donald Trump and Netanyahu? Many people are arguing that Netanyahu was somehow surprised with the way that Donald Trump was talking about the talks between the United States and Iran. Or on the other hand, there are people who are arguing that it was all pre-planned and Netanyahu knew what Donald Trump is going to talk about, and they were totally in line with each other.
No, I think it's more of the latter, and I base that on the fact that I listened to what Netanyahu was saying to the Israeli people in Hebrew. Because they have a tendency, when they speak English, they say one thing, and when they're speaking in Hebrew, it's like, these Americans they're too stupid. They don't know what we're saying. So I'll now tell you the real deal. And he seemed quite pleased with the meeting. Grand success. Talked to Trump. Man, we planned this all out. Iran's in trouble. That's how he was approaching it. And I really would like to see. I don't want to see this end in violence, but I got to admit, there's a part of me that thinks the only way that's going to wake the United States up out of its delusion is to think it's going to go attack Iran, and then it does, and it gets its ass kicked. Because we're all seeing a little hint of that already in Yemen. With they shot down like the third drone within 2 weeks, just the other day, and I think it's important that people who are watching you or listening to your podcast understand that why that's important. The only way the United States, what the Houthis are doing, is they've got mobile missiles, and so they're not in a fixed site. So the challenge the United States has is finding them. And we don't have, we're not like Sauron with some eye, on top of a mountain in Mordor that can see everything. We have to look for them. With traditional intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance packages, fixed wing aircraft or satellites, once you locate a missile that you want to attack and blow up, there's a whole process. Time passes as the information gets passed up, and somebody has to make the decision, and then the group that's going to carry out the attack has to be notified, and then it could be 4 or 5 hours later, and by then the missile's moved. Whereas with the Predator, the MQ-9 Reaper, it's flying over. It's also it's got armament, so you can go, hey, there it is, and launch. This says, sir, we've identified permission to launch. Yeah, so that could take place within a matter of minutes. And it looks to me like what the Houthis are doing is they're putting out dummies, decoys, but they're putting their air defense system around those decoys, and they wait. And here comes the Predator. Oh, I got one, man. And then, boom, they blow it out of the sky. Now, what relevance does that have to the whole, the situation with Iran? Well, if the Houthis, with their level, they're not at the same level of military development and sophistication that Iran is. So if the United States is struggling to deal with the Houthis, and in fact, it thinks it can go into Iran and carry out attacks, it will. I think it will suffer a major defeat. And at that point, Trump's political support will disappear. He's no longer a winner, and he certainly ain't making America great again. And he will be extremely vulnerable. And so what we're going to see is just chaos on the U.S. side, and that doesn't bode well for economic conditions in the United States and those who are dependent upon the U.S. dollar. So this all can get real ugly real quick, is I guess what I'm saying.
Larry, here is what Donald Trump said about the war with Iran, and let me.
If it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
Yeah. How do you feel? It seems to me he knows, he somehow is, the way that he's talking about the war with Iran, it shows that he doesn't want it. And nobody can force him to have this sort of war.
Oh, why do you think he doesn't want it?
Because he says Israel will lead us in that. This is ridiculous. How Israel
Yeah,
will.
yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, um, I confess that I am one of those that tried to find excuses, tried to say, "Oh no, Trump's really not that stupid." No, okay, I was wrong. He is that stupid. He's a buffoon. He's not. He is not thinking critically, rationally about. And what do I mean by critical thinking? You say, if I'm going to um, if I'm going to quit my job, then what is going to be my source of income? What are going to be my expenses over the next 6 months? I'm going to quit my job to go to school to become, let's say, get a commercial driver's license so I can become a truck driver. So, but the type of critical thinking is, okay, you think through, as if I take this action, what are going to be the consequences of that action? And then what must I be prepared to do to deal with those consequences? So, yeah, I'm going to quit my job. Then I'm going to have to pay out $4,000 for the commercial driver's license, and I'm going to be in school for the next 4 weeks. And so I've got to. Maybe I have to have enough money set aside that I can do. That's the type of critical thinking I'm talking about. Trump's not doing that. He thinks, oh, we're the biggest, we're the best. We got the best military. We're the strongest military ever. And yet we can't beat the Houthis. 16 months now. Yeah, well, that was Biden. Look at what I've done. Yeah, what you've done since March 15th. You're losing predators at a faster rate than Biden lost predators. It's not registering. And um, he has surrounded himself with a bunch. A friend of mine described it as bobbleheads. The bobblehead doll where the head goes up and down. That's what Trump has surrounding him. Nobody's pushing back and he's saying, sir, that's you're taking some serious risks here that I don't think we can afford to pay. So that conversation right there, I think, what Trump said, I think underscores that what Bibi Netanyahu subsequently said in Hebrew, that they talked about the upcoming attack on Iran. I think they're going to do it.
Do you think that you've mentioned the people who are right now closer to the president of the United States, to Donald Trump, but how about people like Tucker Carlson, which were so much important in terms of helping him to
Yeah.
win the presidential election? Is he willing to listen to them?
Maybe. What's interesting is both Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk, who's another, he's Turning Point USA. They've both been speaking out about what attacking Iran. Are you crazy? Now, I don't know if they've taken any position vis-a-vis the China tariffs, but Trump he's destroying his base. He's fracturing his base. That's what's taking place right now. He came in promising to get us out of forever wars, and then say, yeah, I'm going to cut the Department of Defense budget by, let's say, 8%. Then turns around, no, we're boosting the budget to $1 trillion. It's the Scooby-Doo moment. You go, what? $1 trillion? What are you doing? So he's, as I say, he's not showing any kind of critical thinking skill here. he's reacting emotionally, and um, and um, if you oppose him, then you all of a sudden you're disloyal. This uh, this is not good where we're headed. Uh, this um, the situation, particularly with that out of this whole tariff fiasco, is what I'll call it. I mean, they really thought that they could bully the world, and they're learning they can't. And now, if they think, you know, I got to emphasize, Trump's thinking about attacking Iran, that all we got to do is attack and we can take him out easily. That is shared by a lot of Americans who also believe, oh yeah, man, we can go in and we'll teach them. They haven't paid attention to any of our past wars. That we're going to hit Iraq with shock and awe, and Saddam Hussein will immediately capitulate. Didn't happen. And they got the United States embroiled in a long war in Iraq that frankly didn't make the Middle East safer, more secure, or the United States stronger. So, this next month, I think, is going to this. What would be ideal is if Trump acknowledged, okay, wait a second, we got to back off and rethink this. He's not going to back off and rethink the tariffs. He's going to be in an economic war with China, and the likelihood of a hot war with Iran, which means he'll be in a hot war with Russia and China.
It seems to me that the Trump administration believes that they're going to get a different reaction from Russia and China in terms of Iran and what's going on between the United States and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And because we know that what was the right now, we are totally aware of what has happened during the conflict in Ukraine. Iran, while they were talking about, we are not doing anything in helping Russia, but they were sending drones to Russia, helping Russia. And China was the United States was putting a lot of pressure on China not to help Russia. They did it. They said we're not going to do anything, but after all, we know that how important China was during the conflict in Ukraine. The political support, the BRICS and the formation of BRICS, how BRICS was capable of helping Russia, it was so much important. And right now, Larry, it seems to me that they're trying to do the same sort of policy against Iran, playing with Russia and China against Iran, which I would assume they're going to get the same sort of reaction that they have received from Iran and China during the conflict in Ukraine. Russia is not going to leave Iran. They're going to help Iran. They're going to continue helping Iran and providing Iran with the intelligence. I believe that. And China is not interested in having, because Russia, a weaker Russia, who's gonna be interested in that?
Yeah.
It's not Iran, it's not China, it's the United States and Europeans. I would assume that Europeans are so dumb if they think that a weaker Russia would benefit them. I think a weaker Russia would not be in the benefit of the European Union or European countries.
Well, let's go back a couple of years. The special at the start of the special military operation, you had a level of cooperation between China and Russia, but it wasn't really, I wouldn't call it a cemented relationship. They did have a history that they had not always been great friends and partners, and the United States policy had been to cultivate warm relations with China in order to split them off from Russia. We certainly didn't want those two getting together. That was a foundation of Kissinger's policy under Nixon. So we're talking, it goes back over 50 years. Then with the sanctions that were levied on Russia, and then China and Russia, they had that first meeting in Moscow with Xi and Putin. and hugs were exchanged, and so the relationship started warming up. Still, throughout that first couple of years, I think China's advice to Russia was, "Yeah, come on, cool it on the military stuff, negotiate. You need to find a negotiated agreement here with the West." I think the Chinese naively believed that they could actually find a way to negotiate with Washington, and that the Americans would eventually come to their senses. Now, in light of what Trump has done with the tariffs, and it's just the disrespect that's been shown to the Chinese. This is, I think they finally said, go back to Putin and said, okay, you were right. They are despicable assholes. But you're right. You can't trust them because I'm sure Putin's telling them, said, look, we're talking to the Americans, but understand, man, we're not going to throw you under the bus. We're not going to betray you in this. We'd like to get a negotiated settlement, but we're not going to sacrifice our basic principles and what we've called for. So just understand that. And so, now that I think the Chinese have come around with the Russians to recognize the United States is, it's like a serial rapist. It's a criminal country. Can't be trusted. It's not. It is the most militaristic, violent entity on the face of the earth. And so we've got to hang together, which is why they met this week with Iran in Moscow, mapping out a strategy. Let's understand we're all on the same sheet of music. How we're going to respond to this, with encouraging Iran. Let's hope that the Americans will take the deal. But if Witkoff is there to deliver, here's our deal. You got to demilitarize. You got to give up all your weapons, and you've got to destroy all of even your peaceful nuclear energy. You don't get to have any nuclear energy. Iran's going to say, no, we're not going to do that. And then Witkoff will go back and say, they rejected your offer, Mr. President. And Trump, we'll show them, and we'll encourage Israel to go. That the silver lining out of this is that it will destroy Israel and the United States. Silver lining? I mean, I'm sad to say it, but it's going to take that kind of disaster to force us to change our destructive ways here in the United States and compel Israel to stop the genocide against the Palestinians. So there may, it'll be horrific, but that's one way the way this could turn out. I don't see neither China or Russia are going to put pressure on Iran to bend over and surrender to the United States. Not at all. Just the opposite.
But do you think that they still believe that they can do something in order to separate them from Iran, or they see it something somehow different? I'm talking about the Trump administration being capable of doing something. I don't know in terms of the talks, and Witkoff is right now is just trying to negotiate with Russia, somehow distancing Russia from Iran. Is that somehow the main goal of the United States?
Yeah, they may. Trump and team may actually believe that. But I actually, when I saw the news, that because I've got RT going on in the background with the headline, hey, they're really focused on the fact that Witkoff is meeting with Putin, and I think Putin is he's not emotional, and he's not going to display visible anger, but I think he will talk very directly and frankly with Witkoff and outline how Russia's, It depends. If Witkoff is saying, "Hey, what do we need to do to get these the negotiations on the Ukrainian war back on track?" Putin will say, "Well, I've told you this all along, so I'll reference you to my speech in June of 2024. This is what must happen before we will be anywhere near entertaining a ceasefire. We're not going to agree to a ceasefire up front. So you need to stop providing intelligence and military support to Ukraine. You, the United States, that needs to stop immediately. But you continue to do it. That if we were doing that in Mexico, you'd consider us as having committed an act of war against you. So that needs to stop. And the Ukrainians need to withdraw from the disputed territories right now. That's Russian territory. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk. Maybe he's saying that, but if the conversation also goes to with respect to Iran, I think Putin's going to make it very clear that we have a special relationship now with Iran, and we are committed to helping Iran defend itself, and that any attacks on Iran that are unprovoked, that would be violations of Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, we'd see that as something that we would need to come to their aid on. So, it's good news, at least, that Witkoff's talking to Putin today before he shows up in Oman. So right now it's 5:20 p.m. in Moscow, and same in Oman. So, at some point in the next 2 or 3 hours, Witkoff's going to go to the airport, fly down to Oman. That's about a 5-hour flight. So he's gonna get into Oman, say 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, get a little bit of sleep, maybe even sleep on the plane, and then all of a sudden they're going to be talking to the Iranians. And so he'll be fresh off of Putin. I think Putin was going to try to do everything he can to avoid escalating to the point of war. He would like to get the war stopped in Ukraine, and he certainly doesn't want to see a war break out between the United States and Iran and its backers, Russia and China. But whether the United States listens is a whole different matter.
Yeah. I was so much confused that the Iranians are insisting on indirect talks. When I asked them what is the main reason they're talking about, you see in the media in Iran, they're talking about if we accept Donald Trump's way of asking us, they want a direct talk. If we accept if we agree on that, and then this is the first step for us. They have to accept the way that we are putting on the table. They don't want to directly talk with the United States, but do you assume that they're gonna sit in different rooms and someone is just
note that Witkoff admitted in his interview with Tucker that despite negotiating with Hamas, he's never had direct talks. They always used an intermediary. That whole game of the game of telephone where you tell somebody something and they tell somebody something, and then goes around, and when it gets back to you, it's a completely different story. There's that risk. But the government of Oman is now in the middle, and they're going to be relaying back and forth. This is the Iranian position. Here is what Iran is willing to do. Iran is willing to go back and abide by the terms of JCPOA, where they will limit their enrichment of uranium, and will open all of their facilities for inspection by the International Atomic Energy Commission, as well as if you want to allow Americans to come in, but they would be accompanied by Russian and Chinese officials as well. So that the sites can be inspected and verified that we're not building a nuke. That's our offer. And you give that to Witkoff, and I'm sure Witkoff said, well, that's unacceptable. No. You go back and tell them they're going to have to dismantle the nuclear industry, and they're going to have to also get rid of these. They can't have these missiles. And the Omanis will go back and say, well, here's what the United States said. And Iran will politely find a way to say, well, tell them, okay, they can go fuck themselves. And we'll leave. So they're, I think part of the discussions with the Chinese and the Russians on the part of Iran was to say, okay, look, these are the kinds of concessions we're willing to make, provided we got your backing. And I'm sure Russia and China provided that backing, support. Yeah, no, but while Iran will commit itself to the terms under like JCPOA, because when you go back and read those are quite reasonable. And again, it's one more example of how the United States is just under the spell of these Zionist crazies, that they accepted the argument that this was allowing Iran to build a nuclear weapon. It wasn't. So,
Larry, do you find it the way that, do you think that the United States would go to talk on issues one by one? Let's start with the nuclear program of Iran, then talk about, I don't know, the way that the acts of resistance, the way that Iran is supporting Hezbollah,
yeah.
Yemen. I don't see Iran be willing to talk about that. I don't know what is in the mind of the Trump administration what do they want from Iran in terms of the acts of resistance?
Well, in their, I'll call it their fantasy world, they believe that the only reason that the Houthis can do what they do and Hamas is still fighting and Hezbollah is still fighting is they're entirely supported from Iran, that Iran's the puppet master and they're the puppets. That's how the United States believes, conceives of this. The constant reference to Hamas being a death cult, Hamas being a terrorist organization. As I said repeatedly in some of our previous conversations, the actual evidence, if you're going to count up and say, okay, let's look at who have Hamas operatives actually killed. What particular attacks have they carried out, apart from October 7th? You find that, Hamas is not this massive, they're not ISIS. They're not out cutting people's heads off. They're not doing mass bombings or bombing shopping centers and blowing. That's not their thing. It never has been. But there's a Hamas narrative that is popular in the West. I watched if anybody wants to see an illustration of this, go watch Joe Rogan's interview with Douglas Murray. Murray's crazy. Good God, he's Bibi Netanyahu with a British accent. But how he paints the world, it is completely divorced from reality. But the point is, you got to, I don't think some people in other countries really fully appreciate how crazy some of the American leadership is on these issues. They don't think about it rationally. They don't think about it logically. It's all emotion, and they paint a narrative, and that narrative is this: that in this case, Iran is controlling all that. So that'll be the other demand that Witkoff will make. Hey, you got to end your support. If you don't end your support for that, then we don't have anything to talk about. And Iran said, okay, well, we're not ending our support. Now, I think the belief that Iran's support is so critical and vital to those is probably overstated or wrong. But it's one of the issues on the table. So this, let's call it this convergence of the tariff war with China and the talks with Iran to try to avert a war. That's what makes this week so critical. And I think my prediction is like Pepe's. I think the talks in Iran will collapse, and and the United States is going to come out of that with trying to figure out how to go to war with Iran. But they're going to have to do so now with the knowledge that they're in a trade war with China, and that Russia has made it very clear that they are allied with Iran, are not going to abandon Iran. And in fact, anything that the United States does to militarily against Iran will affect any hopes of the United States achieving a negotiated outcome with Russia. Russia would prefer to have normal relationships with the United States, but I'm not sure. Maybe there's hope that Trump's taken such a beating on the tariff front that he's going to be so eager for a deal that he would. This would be the ideal scenario. He's so eager to have a diplomatic victory that he'll accept a Russian proposal for a deal with Iran. And hey, man, we got the deal. And if that happens, then that'll buy us some time. I don't think that'll happen, but we'll see.
Let's see what would be the alternative in terms of dealing with Iran, which would be putting pressure on Netanyahu. Here is the new polls in the United States that show that a majority of Americans view Israel negatively.
Mm-hmm.
And 53% of the United States adults expressing that they hold an unfavorable view toward Israel. Do you think that Donald Trump would care about it? Because he has, if you go in that direction, he's going to have the support from the people.
Yeah, no, he's too ideologically. He's an ideological captive of the Zionists, and he's not going to break ranks from that. I mean, his own daughter she's a Zionist, an Orthodox Jew. And I'm not saying that all Orthodox Jews are Zionists, but she is. So, he's got that family tie with that, and he's accepted that he's got Jewish grandchildren. So he's fully embedded in the, let's call it, in the Bibi Netanyahu camp. What's interesting is I don't know if you're familiar with this comedian Dave Smith, but Dave he's Jewish, and what was interesting, he was that Joe Rogan podcast with Douglas Murray. It was actually mostly a debate between Dave Smith, the Jew, and Douglas Murray, and Smith was, he was really taking the side of the Palestinians in terms of, hey, look, what Israel's doing, this brutality, it's just unbelievable. And it was Murray who was, trying to paper it all over and say, oh yeah, no, Israel's not committing war crimes. So the fact that someone like Smith, who appeals to a younger audience, I think his views do start resonating, start spreading out. The Israelis are losing a whole generation of Americans. Unfortunately, right now, people that are like my age, they're 60 years and older, that they're still very much in the Israel can't do anything wrong camp. So, but that's a political change coming. I think what we see in 5 to 10 years, Israel may be a pariah as far as the United States is concerned. I don't know if the Palestinians can wait that long.
Larry, there is an article in the Times that reveals UK's deep involvement in the war in Ukraine, including behind the scene mediation between Washington and Kiev. The role of the British government in terms of British military, in terms of that counteroffensive in 2023, that failed counteroffensive, if you remember that. I would assume that the Kursk region was the mission. The Kursk region was one of them, but they didn't mention that, by the way. We had the article in the New York Times and right now in the Times that both of them are talking about the deep involvement of the United States and the British military in war in Ukraine. What are we getting from these two articles? It seems that the establishment is putting out these sort of articles. At least these people who are talking this way, they didn't talk before. They didn't mention it the way that they're mentioning it. They're talking about it right now. What's the agenda in your opinion? Are they going to be? Are they trying to be honest about what has happened, or they're trying to somehow manipulate the public?
Well, I think they're trying to, they recognize this thing's crashing and burning. It's coming to an end. And so it's trying to basically say, look, hey, we did everything we could do. I haven't read the article, but I wonder if it's got sort of the same tone as the Adam Entus piece in the New York Times, which was basically
somehow the same tone. Yeah.
Okay, so that means, man, we gave those Ukrainians everything they could have, including our great advice, and we had. They just didn't listen to us. They just didn't do it. We tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen. So it's their own fault that they're losing. That's that's essentially, I think, what's going on. They're coming out to say, God, look at everything that we did. We tried our best, but when all was said and done, they just didn't listen. Those Ukrainians acted on their own. It's their fault. It is. I think the people putting that narrative out, though, don't appreciate that what they're doing is, from the Russian perspective, they're going, we thought this was what was going on, but now we know for sure. Now we know for sure that these were acts of war by Britain and the United States. I mean, I can't emphasize enough that if we had this information in the United States that Russia was doing that in Mexico, and Mexico is carrying out attacks inside the United States, we would be enraged. It's really sort of remarkable that Russia hasn't struck back harder yet, because it's an act of war. I'll put it in self-defense terms. The United States has essentially pulled a gun out and pointed it at us. And you know what? Under self-defense law, I can then pull my gun out and shoot them. And it's just, you got to at least applaud the patience and forbearance of the Russians to not have started launching nuclear attacks into the United States. Putin has tried to limit this so that Russia can secure its borders without lighting off a global conflagration.
The point that, in my opinion, is important with this article, Larry, is the role of the British government and British military, British intelligence in terms of being a mediator between the United States and Ukraine. Why did they need that? What was the problem? We know that Antony Blinken, his ancestors came from Ukraine, but I thought that the connection between the Biden administration and the Zelensky administration is much more powerful. The ties are much more they're much more connected than the British. Why
Oh
did they
no,
need the British government to
oh
be
no. So
mediator?
I think you have to go back and look at the history of this. um, I mean, let's start with the fact that the British monarchy and the Tsar, who was overthrown by the communists, they were cousins. Okay, and so there's sort of that in the history that the Brits have never forgiven the Russians. You know, they view the current Russians the same as the Soviets for killing, you know, their cousin, cousin Nicholas. Then you look at the end of World War II, the role that um, Churchill still viewed the Soviets as communists as a threat. Roosevelt not so much, but that was why the Brits played a heavy role in getting a lot of the Bandera folks out of Ukraine. They were allowed to come into England, and then a lot of them resettled in Canada. So there's been this long-standing relationship that both in the intelligence service of Britain and to a lesser extent the military side with that Nazi element that was part of Ukraine, the Bandera faction. So the Americans haven't had that. In the early days of the CIA, what work that they were doing with the Ukrainians, I'm sure was filtered through the Brits. So the Brits have always had that relationship. So that's why.
Just to wrap up this session, Larry, there was an interview. I don't know if you had the time to watch Tucker Carlson's interview with Georgescu in Romania. Here is what he.
I saw a little
watch?
bit of it. I saw a
Yeah.
little bit of it, but yeah, go ahead, show.
Yeah, here is what Georgescu said.
Everybody knows that was a foreign intervention, and particularly from Secretary of State Blinken, that he intervened in the elections and simply dictate what the system have to do. And it's absolutely, everybody knows about this situation, including, of course, President Macron and Maia Sandu from Moldova as well. They intervened. But the most important was Secretary of State Blinken.
What did he do and say that affected your election and Romanian politics?
Well, simply was an intervention. They don't, very clear, they don't need free Romania. To be mentioned that the largest military base of NATO is in Romania. Probably you know about that.
Yes.
And of course, they want to launch the World War III from Romania. And with this situation, of course, they can involve all Europe and also United States. So these, they have interest. They have interest in war.
Yeah. I mean, this, I don't want to hear any American politician complaining about foreign intervention in our politics. We're the masters of it. And what happened to Georgescu is just one example. Continues to happen. I thought, based upon what Hegseth, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, and J.D. Vance said at the NATO meetings a month ago, that there was a growing rift between Europe and the United States. But as I pointed out, early on in our talk today, the fact that you got a coordinated statement from the State Department with Tammy Bruce, the spokeswoman, saying, putting out the line about China and its support for Russia, and then within 24 hours, Kaja Kallas, sort of the foreign minister for the EU, is saying the same exact thing. I mean, same words. All of a sudden, you realize the United States is still coordinating with Europe, particularly against Russia, trying to coordinate against China, trying to coordinate against Iran. So they haven't backed off on that. So Georgescu is he's a victim of that. He represented an alternative that the deep state is still alive and well in Washington, despite Trump's claims that he's trying to take it apart.
Just to understand how coordinated they are, we have to remember the ball is now in Russia's court.
Yeah,
You remember that?
yeah.
Everybody was tweeting. Larry, the point just before wrapping up, he mentioned Emmanuel Macron, and his role.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot any dirty game in Europe that Emmanuel Macron is not part of that.
Yeah.
After all, he wants to be the European representative to talk with Russia.
Yeah. No, listen. They like to refer to Trump as a narcissist. Well, get in line, boys and girls. You got a whole collection of narcissists that are running around. Macron, Starmer, formerly Trudeau. Thank God he's out of, he's gone in irrelevancy. But yeah, they're in leadership positions where they're supposed to have as their number one priority caring for the welfare of the people that they serve. But they don't view themselves as the servants of those people. Those people are their servants. They serve them, not the opposite.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today.
All right. I hope I haven't ruined your Friday.
Great pleasure, Larry, as always.
All right, my friend. We'll talk to you on Monday. Let's hope the world's
Monday.
still here.
Yeah. Take care, Larry.
All righty. Bye.
Bye.